So my name is Warren Bell. I'm a family physician from Salmon Arm, British Columbia, which is in the south central part of British Columbia, interior Salish territory. But before we begin tonight's event, I'd like to welcome gyauustees to speak to you and welcome you to his territory.
Hello, everybody. This is a library. We can be loud up here. I just wanted to say, Huichka Tracey, Huichka de Nutzamach de Swallowing, Huichka de Schoolmish, Buch, Huichka de Mamkom, Huichka de Tamuch, the blood of Mother Earth, and that courses through all of us. I want to bring a reminder that all we are is earth, air, water, and fire. And what we do to Mother Earth happens to us. We have many sicknesses. We have many sicknesses out there, and one of the remedies is to stop the destruction of our Mother Earth. Stop pulling up the poisons and putting and destroying our water, to cease from doing these things to ourselves. One thing that we believe as our people is that what goes around comes around. And we foresaw this was going to happen a long time ago. 7 generations we were praying for this day that we're in right now. 7 generations ago, they were praying for us now. They knew that things would be out of hand. They knew that things would be catastrophically going in the wrong direction. It's bad enough that everything on top of the earth is getting scorched and we're running out of clean drinking water, but to be putting pollution into the ground, to destroying the aquifers underneath the feet where we walk, taking away the life's blood of Mother Earth, that's unlawful. That breaks the law. A lot of them. Breaks a lot of laws. Whatever policies and procedures that they make up for them to get away with doing it, whoever it is, whichever company, whichever licensing, permitting establishment on behalf of the government, whoever's saying it's okay to do this is wrong. Whoever is saying, hey, let's do this, this is a good idea, we'll find out what's down there, they're wrong too. Mother Earth is not for sale. We've done enough damage already. I just wanted to sing a song for you guys. I'm not too sure how long I can stick around here today, but on behalf of the Squamish people, the Squamish Nation, on behalf of the tribal people of Mother Earth, with the responsibility of looking after Mother Earth and all its life, I ask that you, if you pray, pray along during the song. If you have good thoughts and intentions for Mother Earth, go along with that. If we put good things forward, we'll get good things back. So we want good things to happen from people getting together like this. Find out information like our relatives have here on the destruction of what's taking place up north and all over the world. I just got off the phone with my bro from Montana, and he says, oh, you're doing something about that. He says, well, there's this one tribe over here, and half of it is with no water. And slowly but surely, almost like a foot a year, they're losing more and more reserve and clean water. Pretty soon, the whole thing will be unlivable. So they're running into major problems on how they're going to sustain life in that one part of Earth. And you can imagine how many holes there is all over the north, all over the south, all over the world. So think about Mother Earth in this way, through the eyes of an eagle that flies over high and can see everything. The holistic view and the holistic approach that we, the tribal people, along with the guests that are here, will be able to work together to be able to remedy the situations. That the oil and the gas, and that's old news. That's old technology. The age of fire, it's overused. We have the ability to be able to create fuels out of garbage. We have the ability to create power out of wind. We don't need to dam things up and plug things up and shove things back in Mother Earth that aren't supposed to be there to begin with. Those are the facts. Those are facts. It's not my opinion. We don't need to do that no more. Green technology, looking out for future generations. Like I said, 7 generations prayed for all of us here. Now it's our responsibility to take the initiative to pray for the 7 generations coming. That's my opinion. So think about the eagle. And I'll try to sing quiet in this library. Tracey, welcome. Welcome. Thank you.
Little pause before I say anything. What we're going to be talking about this evening is one of those activities that we as visitors have favored with our attention and our efforts and our investment in material and money, and that's called fracking. The title of this series and this particular event is Voices from the Sacrifice Zone, and we're talking about fracking in BC's north, because in northeastern BC, that's where all the fracking in this province is taking place. That's where all the oil and gas extraction pretty much is taking place. The genesis of this is that Dr. Larry Barzilai, who's sitting here in the front row, and I went to northeastern and northwestern BC, went on a tour starting in Dawson Creek and a little farming town called Farmington, which is in the epicenter of the fracking expansion, which is huge these days. Went to Dawson Creek thereafter, met physicians and other medical healthcare personnel, went on to Fort St. John, then to Prince George and Terrace and Kitimat, where the $40 billion LNG Canada project is proposed. It's not yet in action, but it's certainly being proposed. And after we'd done that and heard the stories that people told us, we started to realize that people in this part of the world didn't necessarily know what was going on. And Larry said, and he's summarizing our sort of notes from the tour, he said, you know, maybe it's time that we brought people from the north down here to tell their story. And that's what you're going to hear this evening. It's the voices of those who live with the direct impact of the world of fracking. And you're going to hear stories that will amplify exactly what you just heard from gyauustees. And that is stories of us saying, we think it's okay, therefore it is. But the earth saying, not so good. First of all, I want to just show you another slide, just so you understand that the reason why fracking is of some importance is because it is the source of all new oil and gas since about the mid-'80s. So when you think of new wells being drilled and new processing plants being set up, they're all based on the process of fracking. So the idea that somehow we just have oil wells and those little donkeys that pull it out of the ground, that's hasn't been really dominant in the process for at least 30 years. The next slide is just the face page from our website, and you can see that we think that the next generation is very susceptible and vulnerable, and we have to look after them. The first speaker tonight is Leven, who's an environmental consultant from Dawson Creek, and who worked for a decade and a half in the mining industry and then became involved with First Nations who were starting to work on protecting their land from oil and gas exploration and exploitation and extraction, and discovered that the rules for oil and gas were like the rules of mining 100 years ago. The mining industry has improved its behaviors, but the oil and gas industry definitely has not. Karen's going to tell you that story. Leven.
Hi, I'm Leven, and I'm honored to be here. Thanks for the introduction, Warren. I'm an environmental scientist, as you've just heard. I've worked in the mining industry I have worked in the mining industry for 13 years, and as an environmental consultant for the past 8 years. During my environmental consulting, I've worked on behalf of First Nations across British Columbia and in northern British Columbia, helping to provide technical capacity to the nations so they have a voice against government and proponents. Why am I here? That's a good question. Dr. Meyer is my neighbor, and last June we received notification that they would be developing a multi-well pad less than a kilometer from my home where my husband and my 2 small children live. Obviously, we're very concerned. With this consultation notification was the opportunity to take a bus tour to the site to a gas plant site. After digging in and doing a little bit of research, I became deeply concerned. I looked into the environmental and social aspects of fracking and oil and gas development, and at that point I knew it was very important for me to come south and talk about what's actually happening in the Northeast. If you look to this map right here, the red dots are that whole entire map. That's the Peace region. It's where I call home. All those red dots, there's about 28,000 constructed wells sites since 2005, and with the multiple LNG proposals in the Northeast, they're looking at up to 100,000 constructed in the next 20 to 30 years. Most of them, I'm not quite sure of all, but at least 85% will be fracked. Okay. So what is hydraulic fracturing? It's the process of forcing a fluid at high pressure underground. It basically breaks apart the rocks. The sand in the mixture displaces the gas, and the chemicals force the gas out of the well up to the surface. With this, you're required up to 200 truckloads of water. You also have retention ponds, which are highly toxic, which are on the surface, and storage tanks. Fracking fluid is where most of the controversy lies. The fluid is a mixture of approximately 90% water, 8 to 9% sand, and it can be 0.5 to 2% chemical mixture, which is trademarked. So it has a non-disclosure agreement with the company, so you don't really know what chemicals are in there. The amount of chemicals depend on the geology in the area. You can look up on Frac Focus what chemicals are in the mixture, but it doesn't tell you the percent, and the words are about this long, and even as a scientist, I'd have to research to figure out what's actually in there. The next slide kind of shows some of the main environmental impacts. You could talk for a week about that, but on a high level, you have surface and groundwater contamination, you have air quality impacts, fish and wildlife impacts, cumulative effects, methane pollution and its impact on climate change, exposure to toxic chemicals, blowouts due to gas explosion, waste disposal, and large volumes of water being used in water scarce areas, and fracking-induced earthquakes. This is a pretty telling picture where you have a wastewater disposal pond that's been left unintended. They're not required to be monitored. A lot of them, the integrity fails. A lot of the wastewater can actually be left just in an unlined area on the ground, being able to seep into the water table. The main water contamination is obviously direct contamination. When they drill down into to frack the gas, they put a cement casing down through the aquifer for the fresh water, the drinking water, and sometimes it can crack open and there's direct contamination. Inadequately sealed wells and abandoned wells. A lot of the wells are left after the company is done and no one's left there for closure or remediation. Re-injection of the processed water for waste disposal, so they actually re-inject the water into the ground and leave it there, if you can imagine that. And again, overuse of the water in areas that cannot afford to give water up. This is a pretty telling slide here of the antelope. This is from the United States. It's the antelope there, but clearly the wildlife are going to go to the easiest area to find drinking water. They don't know it's toxic. A lot of these ponds, there's old snow fences left. They're blown over, and then the wildlife consumes this water. There's air dispersion of chemicals, and they consume the vegetation where the particulate matter is. There's reproductive implications and premature death, fragmentation of their habitat, and obviously these corridors open easy access for their prey and hunting. Obviously the seismic activity also affects their wildlife habitat as well. The air quality impacts are toxic chemical release, diesel exhaust, which is carcinogenic, silica from the sand, nitrogen oxide, and methane, which contributes to climate change. This natural gas has been touted as clean energy, which is not true. We thought that it would help to reduce greenhouse emissions. And however, the following diagram shows you that the methane actually increases the global climate impact. This is in million metric tons. This is from the US fugitive emissions from 2012. There's 157 million metric tons on the left-hand side when they did the original calculation using carbon dioxide, but when you incorporate methane, it's gone up on the right-hand side to 1,414 million megatons. Which is equivalent to 35 to 314 coal power plants. Methane has the potential to heat the earth 100 times more over a 10-year period than carbon dioxide. This shows the exposure pathways. This is actually from the BC government's Human Health Report in 2014, which it clearly states that there is insufficient information to proceed, and it made 14 clear recommendations that needed to be addressed. Not one has been addressed to date. I would like to mention at this point, I'm actually not totally anti-industry. However, I do believe the industry needs to develop projects in a socially and environmentally responsible manner. When they came to deliver the consultation notification to Dr. Meyer and I in our neighborhood, we were busy. We got busy right away. We had 21 days to respond to the proponent, and we wrote a 10-page technical report. Not one of our recommendations for baseline data was addressed, and approximately 8 months later, they're probably fracking under my house right now as we speak. They're developing that multi-well pad site. Basically, people feel powerless. I thought this slide was good. It kind of shows you where around the world and in Canada there are either bans or moratoriums on fracking. Scotland deemed, they did a cost-benefit analysis on fracking, and they said, forget it, we're not going to have it because the environmental and health benefits or risks do not succeed the risks of fracking. In Canada, there's a moratorium or a pause on fracking until they have more information, and to date, in these places, they don't feel that they have enough information for them to proceed. I just quickly wanted to mention this is one of the projects I have recently worked on, and in the past. On the right, the Galore Creek project, and on the left is the Peace region. That's about, the scale on the left is about 120 kilometers. The Galore Creek project is about 40 kilometers. Pardon? Is it the other way maybe for you guys? Sorry. Okay. You get it, what I'm saying, though. Okay, so after working in mining for 21 years, I can't believe we haven't learned from our mistakes, and it's actually just very negligent in the way that they're proceeding with fracking. The regulations do not meet the requirements that would protect the environment or people. In mining, you can't even touch a shovel to dirt unless you have 3 to 5 years of baseline information. So there's obviously some fatal flaws in the regulatory scheme of things. Okay. Before I leave you, I just wanted to let you know what my recommendations would be. I do believe our laws need to change. We need to place the responsibility of adequate baseline environmental studies, Aboriginal and community engagement on the proponent prior to development. At this point, there is no responsibility left to the proponent. Large scale or small or multiple small oil and gas development projects should be reviewed under the environmental assessment process. The Environmental Assessment Act needs to be amended to capture oil and gas activities, so it'll trigger an environmental assessment. It's basic for mining. It's based on footprint and tons per day. That's how it opens up and triggers environmental assessment. There's nothing in those regulations that will trigger these multi-well pads and fracking, especially. Also, we definitely need to do a cumulative effects impact study in the Peace region. Thank you.
Just a quick question. How many people are aware of the fact that the provincial government just published a report of a 3-man commission examining the technical side of fracking? One hand is up. Well, they certainly made clear that everybody knew about it. Andrew Nikiforuk did an assessment of this report. The word concern, meaning worry or anxiety, occurs 130 times in this report. The word incomplete with reference to information is found 27 times, and the word absent with reference to information occurs 17. The database on which fracking is taking place is grossly flawed. Our next speaker knows all about that from direct and personal experience. Karl Mattson, he says his daughter is 6th generation, so that means he's 5th generation farming from a little town called Rolla, and it's right on the border between Alberta and British Columbia, and it is now becoming part of the heartland of the fracking invasion. Karl has artistic leanings. I've seen some of his photographs. They're absolutely beautiful, sort of sepia-colored things have been riding around in the range. And he's going to talk to you about the personal experience you have when you are surrounded in your family farm that you've lived on for generations by this invasive process that tears the world apart around you. Karl.
Yeah, I'm Karl Mattson. I'm a farmer from just north of Dawson Creek, about 16 kilometers north, near the Alberta border. And I'm an artist as well. Yep, okay. Next. Can I get you to click it? I've often been known to say I've moved a half mile in my entire life. That's sometimes good, sometimes bad, but anyway, that's where I was born and raised. Next one. Yeah, I grew up there my whole life on the same piece of land. Still live there now and did all the stuff that you do as you grow up, you know, tractors and animals and all that stuff you do as a kid on farm. And it was pretty much my whole existence as I grew up. By the time I was a teenager, my parents had broke some land and we had a fairly successful cattle ranch running by then. As I got older, I started working night shifts on a series of farms, doing like delivering babies, like during calving season. I don't know if you call that a midwife when you're dealing with animals, but and then I'd work in the summer, like or seasonally, like lots of farmers have to do to get paid. And yeah, I took over the family farmhouse. That's it when it was built with an axe by that old relative guy, and that's my place now with all those wacky additions and stuff like that. And I help my farm, help my parents out, and I farm as well. I've always been an artist. I used to make art for the sake of art, just self-exploration, normal stuff. My mom was, she's a fairly well-known artist up there locally, and she always encouraged creativity and just be who you want to be out there. So that was good. And I started showing when I was 19, large metal sculptures. That's in the traffic circle in Dawson Creek. And but I always collected things from the farm, rusty steel and bones and all that, and just kind of a self-taught sculptor. So I learned to do that, and I made a lot of art. And my art took a shift 15 years ago or so. I'm not really good with numbers. It was quite a while ago, when around then when the a lot of increase of traffic, wells, rigs, closer and closer to my farm, it started happening really rapidly, and I seen it coming. It sneaks up on you. It takes time, but it is really fast. And I called it the year of the flaring. It was often in that old house, the windows would shake. I'd have to load up my family and head out in the camper. And back then, it's getting a bit better now. Like at least now you get really quick responses about, you know, at least you get a response. But back then it was, you know, lots of calls to oil and gas companies, sometimes being on hold. 1-800 numbers were, for instance, this is a pamphlet we get for safety, for shelter in place. And that's kind of what farmers get. It's getting a little bit better, but not much. It used to be, these numbers used to be long distance, and sometimes you'd be on hold for 20 minutes if you smelled rotten eggs in your yard. In 2008, my H2S monitor went off in my house that I had to purchase. I purchased that monitor, and it was difficult to find that report, and there was actually a fairly serious leak, and I have the report. My neighbors got sick, and we had to dig that up. That there is less than a mile from my house, and that was in the evening, not daytime, but the sky wasn't dark. That's how much soot was from that explosion that lasted for about 45 minutes, just fireball after fireball. And I never did get a follow-up on that one. Thanks. And so my art had shifted. It was getting fairly grim around there, I thought. People weren't paying attention. Farmers weren't. Some farmers were trying to get a piece of the pie. Some people were concerned. It's tricky. My wake-up call was that year of the flaring. My daughter was about to be born, and we had this, like maybe 8 sets of twins would be a normal thing on our farm. And that particular winter, we had 22 healthy sets of twins, and the strange part was it was the herd hadn't changed, like the same bulls, same cows. And then we had this kind of crazy mutation that lived for a while, and I just thought that it had to do something, because it was the year of the flaring. It was really, really aggressive. And it kind of changed. It woke me up, kind of scared me. So I went to a lot of public meetings. I started archiving. Rather than being involved, I'm not a very good speaker or keeper of documents and scientific stuff. That's just not me. So I started archiving it all. I have chunks of video like this guy's doing, and don't know what to do with that either, but I started making sculptures in response to the lack of a proper safety plan. Because that's one thing they're really lacking with those pamphlets is you can tape up your windows and doors. That's one of the things of shelter in place. We're not provided the duct tape. There's only 2 helicopters. It's just a completely ridiculous, unrealistic plan. So my response was to start making art about it, and that's one way I've always been able to speak. So yeah, I had a tribunal about this. They took me serious enough to take me to this weird court thing, and it was me against industry trying to get, first of all, I was trying to get a pipeline not so close to my home. Then I realized setback zones don't exist hardly where I live. And so then I started saying, well, we want even just my family, but farmers need basic first responder gear, or at least an alert system for major leaks or pipeline ruptures. I was denied that. And in 2010, there was a film. But these are my sculptures I built to say, like, you're not going to give me my stuff to survive for my family, then I'll build my own. And the one on the left is my family model. It, 4 of us could fit in there, and a helicopter picked us up, and well, it didn't pick it, we faked it, but it flew it away. They're not realistic things, they actually do work. And the other one is the bachelor model. I've been through a lot, and I've shown these around BC and into Manitoba and stuff. Yeah, I think it's moving really rapidly up there, and it has been for a long time. I've been involved in many little startup groups. Everybody feeds off each other's energy and gets very excited, and you just get overwhelmed. And if you're doing this as an individual, you get even more overwhelmed with the scientific jargon, and paperwork comes in sometimes every 2 weeks. I'll get a notification paper about being in a new safety zone or this or that. You're just kind of completely overwhelmed with stuff. So it's hard to have a voice. I'm at here. I've seen lots of older farmers actually leave just because it's just getting ridiculous, or it's what's happening is that you get a loss of sentimentality first for your family farm, and then after that, it actually does just get kind of overwhelming with the industry and health hazards and whatnot. But I call it the Wild West right there. It's taken me time to realize that what we thought was the Wild West, I can see the Alberta from my place. I can see Alberta from my place. And I fought for a setback zone for a pipeline, sour gas pipeline, 90 meters from my house, because I knew in Alberta 15 years ago, I think it was 100 meters, and that doesn't exist for me. So that's that red line, that's my house with the circle, and I found that kind of disturbing. My issues with oil and gas companies has lessened because I used to get kind of wound up at them personally, and that's not really, they're doing their job for the most part. They're cutting some corners here and there, but they're following government site regulations, and that's where I think things need to be a lot tighter. And we can flip it again. Yeah, my daughter's the 6th generation in that old house, and I'm pretty concerned that there won't be very many more in that house. It could last forever, but it's getting really daunting. up there to have a voice. So this is good. All right. Thanks.
That's an unmistakable voice of somebody who's living through essentially the destruction of his world. And done because every time we turn on the gas for our stove or have a furnace in our houses, we're using the product that is generated by the process that is doing the harm. Now, I would just throw in, as an announcement, that a group of Canadian government and independent scientists just issued a report in which they said the title of the article is Canada must, it says global carbon pollution must be reduced near zero to limit harsh climatic impacts. So not only is the process making the lives of somebody like Karl miserable, but it's actually having a massive effect on the entire circulation of our planet. The next speaker is going to talk about its effects on us, humans, and our health, because it's not a benign process to do all this kind of extractive activity around human settlements. Ulrike Meyer is a family physician from Dawson Creek who's been in this country since the 80s and who has watched changes take place that are very disturbing from a health medical point of view. And she has become a strong voice for advocacy around this aspect of human health. And I'd like to invite Ulrike to come forward and speak about that now.
Thank you. Hello everyone, Ulrike Meyer is my name, and I call the piece also my home, and came over from Germany in the mid-80s and really loved the country up there. It's beautiful. I think as healthcare professional, it's our mandate to promote and to protect the public health and well-being. That also means to speak up to inform the public. I do have a strong connection with nature and see the interwoven connection of our well-being with the well-being of our environment. There's a connection between the events and changes happening up in the north of the province to the rest of this province, the country, and the wider world. This led to our tour to the south of the province with help and engagement of CAPE and the hope for your support in voicing our concern in regards to the oil and gas industry and the fracking. For the demographics, if you look at the map, the green area, that's all the Northern Health Authority. So it's a big part of the province actually, and most people in the south are not aware how much up there is in the north. And the size is probably of the Northern Health Authority, the green area, 330,000 people living there. So quite dispersed over the area. And we are living in the northeast of the Northern Health Authority, close to the Alberta border. And that is probably around 90,000 people up to Fort Nelson. And the south piece where I practice, it's around a catchment area of 30,000 people. There were several health flags which made us stop and think what's going on. One colleague diagnosed the 10th case of glioblastoma in our community and surrounding area. A glioblastoma is a primary malignant brain tumor, and it's among the most disabling lethal types of brain tumors. It's incurable. You can go for surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, but your median survival is around 15 months. In the past, it constituted like 2% of all brain tumors in the 50s to 80s, and now it's 12 to 15%. And today I looked at an article, it's even 18%. More men than women are affected, and the peak incident is between 45 and 75 years. Can also affect kids and young people too. One known risk factor is exposure to radiation, so ionizing radiation increases the risk. And this could come from radiation treatment when you have a cancer, atomic bomb exposure, which is not so common, right? And natural occurring radioactive material, also called NORM. Normally, the natural occurring material is captured in rock deeper in the rock formation in the earth, but it can come back up also with wastewater when fracking happens. I don't know if there's a connection or not, but it would warrant further study and to see if there is any connection with the fracking industry. Yeah? Yes, I can. Good, good, good. Maybe this way. Is that better? No. Closer. This is better. Closer. Like an ice cream cone.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Eat your microphone.
Ease your microphone. Our intern is Dr. Suk Zakaria. He worked for 2 years in Dawson Creek, and in this period he diagnosed 10 cases of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Idiopathic means there's no known reason for it. There's some other diseases which cause a disease too, like somebody has lupus, autoimmune diseases, or somebody who worked in an asbestos mine, then you would have an explanation. It means anatomically your lungs getting scarred. You have less exchange area for breathing and oxygen absorption, and your symptoms will be you get really short of breath, and it gets in the end to respiratory failure in over 80% of people. Men are more affected than women, and the median survival is 2 to 5 years. Treatment options, there's anti-inflammatory, immune suppressors, or antifibrotics, but it doesn't change the outcome of the disease. Incidence, the best data came from the UK. They diagnosed the most correctly, and it was like 4.6 per 100,000. And so you would expect 1.5 cases per 30,000, but not 10 cases in our area. And it's quite devastating. I have one patient, he's diagnosed, saw the specialist in Edmonton, and he told him, I could treat you or not treat you, but it would not make the outcome, and you might have side effects from the treatment. So he opted not to be treated, but he's so anxious what is lying ahead of him to die of respiratory failure. Overall, there's a rising incidence of pulmonary fibrosis or idiopathic or pulmonary fibrosis, particularly in highly industrialized regions of countries. Autopsy studies revealed higher levels of aluminum and silicone in the lymph nodes close to the lungs in people who died of IPF compared to controls who didn't have the disease. Silica is the main ingredient of the fracking sand, and aluminum levels are also elevated in our area in the water. I'm not sure, is there a connection? Is there not a connection? But it would warrant also further investigation. My own clinical observation, I brought 2 cases. The first one is Charlie. He's a 70-year-old farmer, non-smoker, married, living outside Dawson Creek on a farm, and he loves to dance. And he came in 2014 and reported that he has these episodes of having that sensation of losing consciousness. And he said it's not really pleasant, lasts 5 minutes, and then he's okay. Later, it went on that he really lost consciousness, and it was witnessed by his wives or neighbors and friends. Over time, he also had impairment of his memory. He forgot how to play crib, and he noticed that his energy went down. His exam was normal cardiovascular, neurological exam, maybe a little bit low blood pressure. His past medical history was not contributing, and all the investigation we did were all negative. He saw our internal medicine specialist, he went to cardiology services, and many visits in the emergency room. When I asked him about his environment, this could be the next slide, he said 1/2 mile from my house is 4-well fracking and flaring going on from a 4-well pad. And then 2 miles southwest from his house was large holding tanks with wastewater, and they were open. And in the winter, there's propane heaters attached to the tanks to keep that water open, and then this fumes is coming up to his house. And this was going for almost 2 years. And in the last follow-up in December 2016, he said, feeling well, the best in 5 years. In conclusion, when the tanks were removed and the well was non-active, his health improved. I'm not sure what his long-term sequelae will be from the exposure. Case 2 is Bernice, a 74-year-old woman living on a farm outside Dawson Creek, overall well and fit. She didn't have any significant past medical history. She presented with tingling and numbness in both legs below her knees and said, "It feels like I'm walking on felt pads." She had a normal exam and she went for nerve conduction studies which were within normal limits. I also asked her, "What's happening around your home?" And she stated that a compressor station was situated above her house on the property boundary, and that below her house is a big body of open water, but it's on fire for 24/7. I made her aware it could be in connection with what she's exposed to, that her nerves are showing the symptoms. I did not have a follow-up with her because she was not my own patient. I don't have any, no, you can go back, yeah. Thank you. If you look at biometric data, meaning that we check human beings, right, for toxicology levels and measure it, there is not much happening up north except that Dr. Elise Caron-Baudouin came out. She was at that time in 2016 a PhD student in toxicology at the University of Montreal. And she did a pilot study and had funding for testing 30 pregnant women in the South Peace. 15 happened to be in Dawson Creek from my practice and 15 from Chetwynd, which is around 100 kilometers south of us. She did urine hair samples and checked in the urine samples concentration of a benzene biomarker, which is a known hormone disruptor and also carcinogenic in the urine of pregnant women. And the total were over 3 times higher than other Canadians were found in 5 out of the 30. High exposure to benzene during pregnancy is associated with low birth weight, increased risk of childhood leukemia, and greater incidence of birth defects. The second part of her study, she checked the median hair levels and found barium, strontium, manganese, and aluminum higher in study participant compared to the reference levels of other Canadians. Of note was that 26 of the 29 women had higher levels, and then the indigenous women from the Chetwynd area had higher levels than the women from Dawson Creek. And the same trace metals are naturally occurring in the Montney Formation deep down. The other research which was done in our area was by Dr. Judy Krasankowski, and she noted higher lung cancer, respiratory illness, and mortality rates in northeastern BC compared to the rest of the Canadian population. So if you look at the slide, on the left side you have the columns for Canada. Next one would be then BC, Vancouver, Northwest, and Northeast to the far right. And all the columns are higher in the Northeast. These are old data, like going up to, she collected 97, 2002, and the fracking process in our area really started full tilt in 2005, but the fracking started full tilt in our area in 2004 when it took off. So it would be interesting to see what the statistics are now, because in the north you have higher smoking rates, we had always a higher rate of sexually transmitted infection, low education levels, and then part of it might be reflecting in the industries up in the north. But it would be nice to see the current data, but I'm not able to obtain them in this format. Implication for public health. Hayes and Schonkopf assessed current literature investigation impacts of UNGD with unconventional natural gas development, and I will mention it as UNGD, on public health in the US. There were 31 original and relevant studies. 84% indicating public health hazard, elevated risk, or adverse public health outcomes with UNGD. And in 69% of the study there was adverse effect on water. Majority of papers have not established a clear cause to these public health outcomes, but were thought due to deterioration of drinking water quality, local air pollution, social and economic pressures. There's need for additional studies and epidemiological research to better understand the pathways by which public health is impacted by UNGD. The BC Ministry of Health, Ministry of Natural Environment, and OGC, they did perform a 3-year human health risk assessment in 2012 and ending in 2014. And their conclusion was, overall, this assessment suggests possible elevated concentration of potentially concerning chemicals in the air, water, and food in some locations, but finds the probability of adverse health impacts due to this exposure to be low. Literature review occurred before the recent search and a relevant scientific study on this topic, and this study is cited by the industry and Northern Health Authority too. And most of the studies we have now are coming from the United States. Conclusion. With the approval of the LNG facility in Kitimat, there will be more UNGD upstream in the northeast of the province to meet the demands. There needs to be a full public inquiry into the hazards to human health, drinking water, air, and environment. The industry needs to be regulated and accountable for current damage and adverse outcomes. And I would agree with Karl, it's the Wild West up there. A top-down approach, meaning to test and monitor humans, animals, then the air and water would be preferable. Dr. Elise Corroborat will return in May 2019 to collect data from 100 pregnant women in the South Peace, so it will give us a little bit better idea and a better sample. The industry needs to prove to the public that they are not causing harm. For affected people showing symptoms like Charlie or Bernice, possibly related to UNGD, there needs to be a fund available to pay for independent toxicology study at no cost to the patient. Any multi-well pads, holding tanks, compressor station should be set at least 1,600 meters back from any residence should be the rule, as the greatest health hazard lies within the 1 mile zone. The current distance is 100 meters for a multi-well pad from your house. And if you look at a wind turbine, the setback is regulated at 1,300 meters for a wind turbine. What are our current cancer rates compared to the rest of BC and Canada? Why is it so hard to obtain the data for the Northeast? We have to look at the boomtown effects leading to low education levels, increased drug use, increased sexually transmitted infection rates, increase of criminal activity, poverty, and the slow deterioration of community. There are no environmental impact studies in place to account for all projected and existing UNG projects and their cumulative effect. No carbon footprint is calculated for the UNGD, and no carbon tax is collected. A third independent party needs to oversee the operation and practices on site. The Oil and Gas Commission is not independent from the industry. They cannot fulfill their mandate to protect the public and the environment and the interests of the industry. Would you ask the fox to watch over your chicken coop? And one last thought and quote I found in Dr. Warren Bell's article and really sounded with me is solastalgia, a term that connotes a sense of painful loss of one home while still living it. Thank you.
Freda, we're ready for you. If you want to do a quick check that we can hear you. Right now you're on mute.
So now we're going to move out into the digital universe. And we have the honor of introducing Freda Huson, I believe, yes, who has been centrally involved in the Wet'suwet'en protest against the establishment of a pipeline, a gas pipeline through their territory. So I'm going to turn it over to Freda to say a few words for 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Freda.
Hi. So I'm here in Buddhist.
So Freda, go ahead. I'm just going to mute us so that it won't cut out.
All right, I'm here in Ushering territory, and I've been here for the last 10 years. And right now we have CGL that had gained access to our territory via a court injunction. And we've been here 10 years, and we've successfully kept out 2 of the pipelines that were proposed through here. That was the Enbridge and PTP. And through the injunction, CGL has been in here and they have police escorting all the workers in, so they actually have their own security, as well as RCMP, who continue to harass us and keep us off our territory, even though we've been trapping for the last, since time immemorial, and for the last while since we've been here, we've been trapping for 6 years, and they've blocked us and prevented us from accessing our territory. So we didn't do too well and ended up going into a hole with that. And right now we're in a legal battle with them, and more we're finding that the BC Oil and Gas Commission issues out permits. And just recently I found out that the BC Oil and Gas Commission was only created to speed track oil and gas projects because it takes too long to the regular BC process. So they don't answer any of our questions that we have, and a lot of the permit requirements they claimed they had to meet, we identified through the court documents that we went through their 4 extensive binders and found a lot of errors on CGL's part. And when we questioned the BC Oil and Gas Commission, they continue to deny that they have not met their permits, yet we can see they haven't met their permits. And they're doing a lot of things like they haven't done an archaeological assessment, and after hours our people were going in and going through the dirt piles because they just totally bulldozed a site that leads into our Weiss Trail, which is a historic site. And no matter how much we were telling them that they needed to do an archaeological study, they just ignored us. And then when we found something, they just came in and took it and used police escort and didn't even tell us they were arriving, because we were supposed to accompany them to the artifact, and they ended up just like stealing it. Basically, they came and took it and then left. And now they tell us that we have to write a letter, and because there's other Indigenous interests in artifacts, even though the courts have already proved that our chief had gone and testified about this territory, that this does belong to our clan. So we have all these systems working against us, even though we went to court and proved that we never extinguished or gave up our rights to these territories. And yet they use the system against us, like the court system, the police system. Almost feels like it's back to the 1800s, 1900s, where they're trying to force us out of our lands. And this is the only territory where we still have salmon that spawn here, and this project could impact that salmon spawning channel. And the river that flows by my cabin, where I've been living here for the last 10 years, it's clean, that you can just go up to the river and take a cup to it and drink it. And they want to put these projects want to put the pipes under our river, and they want to do clearing that would probably go right up to the river, and that would impact the water. Wouldn't be clean anymore. If they clear the trees, then you're going to have silt and mud going into the water, and then it's going to impact the salmon. So, and their proposed route is proposed through some old growth forest, and we identified there's a lot of white pine, which is an endangered species. And so we've counted 15, I believe, within the old growth forest. And believe it was the Buckley Valley Research Center that had done a study on the white pine, and it's supposed to be protected, but I'm not sure how protected it is in BC. So there's so much wrong with the system. I just see it as a flawed system, and it's sad that the powers that be are pushing these projects, even though they're impacting people, impacting people's lands, people's waters, and it doesn't feel like the provincial government or any of those people care about that, and yet it's going to impact themselves and their own children. And it's frustrating, and we're doing whatever we can legally. Right now we're in a legal battle, so we're fighting the injunction. Originally we were going to leave it, but we heard that they will use it against us, asking us why we didn't fight the injunction. So we're fighting the injunction, and they also put a civil suit on myself and Smogafgem. So we have to respond to that, and we have a court date of May 26th, 27th, 28th, and 29th. We have to go to court in Prince George to respond to the injunction, and we have another legal team working with us against CGL with all the things, the errors that we found in their documents, and we're doing what we can to see if we could use the legal system to stop this project, because we know how much of an impact it's going to be on our lands, and how this does not just impact us, it impacts our neighbors, because all the waters, the streams flow into the river, and the river flows into other rivers, and it flows right down into the coast. So all of us are impacted, and even on the coast with the tankers will impact the peoples there. So all of us are connected one way or another, and so we've been battling here, and we'll continue to battle, because we know that we need these territories for our next generations, and we need the territories behind here for our healing center, which we have constructed here and have been bringing our people back to the land. So, because we find the land is healing, and so we need this territory for that as well.
Thank you very much, Freda. Can you hear me?
I just unmuted you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I wonder if you could stay with us. We have a couple of more speakers, and then we'd like to have you with us if there are questions directed towards you. Is that okay?
Okay.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to introduce somebody who's much closer to Quest University than we are geographically, and that is Tracey Saxby, who's a marine biologist, but also is the executive director of My Sea to Sky, an advocacy group that has opposed LNG development in this part of the world, and has spoken out, both Tracey herself and the organization has spoken out about LNG development, which, in case you didn't know, all LNG is derived from fracking, pretty much. Tracey, please come and say a few words.
Thanks, Warren. So I just want to take a moment to connect a few of the dots here. 85% of BC's natural gas now comes from fracking. And as we've heard tonight, fracking is having devastating impacts on the health and well-being of the people in Northeast BC, on the wildlife, on our environment, and on our climate. And despite all of this, the BC government right now is recklessly fostering a new fossil fuel industry, liquefied natural gas, that will increase fracking and worsen climate change. And as you know, for the last 5 years, we have been fighting to stop wood fibre LNG from going ahead here in Squamish. And we have also been networking with organizations all across the province to share what we've been learning, because we were essentially the first organization that started tackling LNG and liquefied natural gas. And so we've been sharing all of the research that we've done, and also trying to collaborate with as many of these other small organizations that have sprung up all over the country that are trying to stop either fracking or stop LNG developments from moving forward in their communities as well. And this is how all of these amazing partnerships, for example, with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, have come forward, and it's such an honor to be here tonight and to be a part of this event that they have coordinated. So last week, just to give you some quick updates, the BC government announced even more tax breaks for LNG. And this is in addition to a whole suite of tax breaks and electrical subsidies and exemptions from the carbon tax and a whole range of other deals that they've essentially given this new fossil fuel industry to sweeten the pot, to try to encourage this new fossil fuel industry to go ahead so that we can dig up our natural gas as quickly as possible and export it overseas. And the subsidies that were announced just last week have been calculated to be worth about $5 billion. And so to put that in perspective, scientists have told us that we have 12 years to deal with a climate catastrophe that we as a civilization, as an entire planet, are facing. It was 12 years. And last year, the BC government released a Clean BC climate plan, which is meant to help us get there so that we can achieve our climate targets. So last week, when they announced these tax breaks for industry, for the fracking industry, for the natural gas LNG export industry, that's worth $5 billion. The amount that they allocated to try and fight climate change through the Clean BC climate plan is less than $1 billion. It's $902 million. So they keep on propping up fossil fuel industries. They keep on pursuing business as usual, recklessly, irresponsibly, and not doing what we need to do to collectively tackle this climate challenge that we are facing. And it just boggles my mind. So we have a few actions that you can take right now. If you haven't already, please sign the House Sound Declaration. We have a copy of it up the back. We also have a petition on our website. You'll have to do this after the event today, to ban fracking. You can sign that as well. And last week, we also set up a letter that you can write a letter to your MLA and to Premier Hogan and essentially say, what the hey, what are you doing? There's been over 800 letters have just been sent in a little over a week, which is amazing. People are mad. People are furious. And they have a right to be, because this government is selling the future of every single person on this planet. They are putting the rights of these fossil fuel companies above everybody else on this planet, above the wildlife on this planet, above having an earth that is habitable for future generations. So you deserve to be mad, and I do encourage you to please send a letter to them and tell them that you are. So as far as wood fibre LNG goes, we're getting mixed signals from them. On the one hand, they say that they're about to award their contract for construction. That was meant to happen at the end of last month. It hasn't happened yet. And they are meant to start construction at the end of June. But we have a team of volunteers that are carefully monitoring everything and all of the permits that they have to go through. They haven't applied for all the permits yet. So on the one hand, they're saying that they're going ahead, and on the other, we're not seeing movement. So it's a little bit like we don't know whether they're waiting for some of these tax breaks. We don't know if they're waiting on the decisions on various other exemptions on the steel import tariffs. So it's a bit of a wait and see game, but right now we are preparing. We are hosting workshops in the next couple of weeks for people that are interested in participating in civil disobedience, so that you know what your rights are. And even if you're not interested in participating in civil disobedience, it's still worthwhile coming. So those events are also on our website, and you can RSVP for those. And I'm going to keep it brief. That's it from me. I believe that Don is up next, and yeah.
Sure. Much of what you've been hearing now has been about the downside, the dark side of the fossil fuel industry. But now you're going to hear a speaker who has spent decades working on what is now an obvious sunrise industry. Fossil fuels are a sunset industry. Their time is limited. Sunrise industries are the ones that are going to power and animate our society in decades to come with increasing impact. And in particular, the renewable energy industry is going to be at the center of that. And within that industry, the use of both wind and in particular solar energy is going to play a dominant role, and it already is beginning to play a dominant role. So I'd like to introduce Don Pettit, who's the founder of Peace Energy Co-op, who has a lot to say about this subject. Don, please go ahead.
Thank you. These are some very sobering stories we're hearing tonight. So as Warren just explained, I'm here to present the positive message that I've been delivering for the last 20 years regarding renewable energy. We started the cooperative back in 2003, really to build the world we would like to see. We decided somewhere along the road that we wanted to put all of our time and effort into exactly that. And so that's what we've been doing for since 2003. We promote clean energy, we build clean energy infrastructure, and we educate. And we have a very clear message, which I'll just state for you right now. Here it is. I think you've heard it already from various sources, but let me just state it very clearly from a standpoint of someone who's working in the industry full time, the renewable energy industry. And here it is. We are now in the midst of the most dramatic and important energy transition in human history. This shift to the new clean energies of wind, solar, geothermal, conservation, efficiency, and others, these, I'm reading some of this, so my computer just went weird. These are mature and robust energy solutions. They offer tremendous opportunities for jobs and wealth creation. They're in a much cleaner environment and the only real answer to climate change. In other words, in a nutshell, we know what the problems are, and we actually know exactly how to fix them. And we also have the tools to do so now in our hands. I think a brief history of our cooperative helps to illustrate this very positive message. Peace Energy's first project back in 2003 was Bear Mountain Wind Park near Dawson Creek. This was BC's first commercial wind facility, quite large at 102 megawatts. The co-op initiated this project and was deeply involved for the 6 years of planning and construction. I think our cooperative set a really high standard for community-based wind development. We really engaged the regional community on this one. And we showed clearly how industry and communities can work together for the common good. I could talk all evening about the wind industry that we launched here in this province that got well underway up here and then collapsed, apparently due to government indifference, policy changes at the highest level. Just know that the Peace Country and the province of BC as a whole could now have a vibrant and growing wind industry, at least some of it community-owned, if it chose to, but it does not choose to. I don't know why. Meanwhile, at Peace Energy, we watched as the cost of solar took an unanticipated and remarkable plunge in cost, which you've probably heard about. We have now entered the business of solar energy. The Peace region is not only a world-class wind resource, but also a world-class solar resource, as does most of the province of British Columbia. Peace Energy is now offering a steady stream of public solar education seminars. We're running training courses for solar installers and keeping a few of them quite busy. And of course, we're designing and installing solar energy systems across Northeast BC and elsewhere. In fact, I'd like to just I've got a short video I'd like to run right now. It's 3.5 minutes. This shows off one of our recently completed solar projects that we're very, very excited about. It's called You Don't Have to Be Big to Be Green, because it's located in the small, wonderful community of Hudson's Hope up here in Northeast British Columbia. This is the largest municipal solar installation in the province, and it makes Hudson's Hope the most solarized community per capita in Western Canada. So let's run this short video and have a look at it.
Okay, I'm just going to line this up here. Just give me a sec. Here we go.
thank you. It can be fun working in the renewable energy sector. So in summary, here's my message. Fossil fuels have been a remarkable and immensely powerful tool that has got us to where we are today. But their almost exclusive use on a truly global and massive scale has brought problems, dire problems that we now know are abundantly clear. The good news is that we know what these problems are. Most of them can be traced back to how we generate and use energy. We now know how to fix these problems, and we have the tools in our hands to do so. No new technologies are needed. With these new energies of wind, solar, geothermal, and others, we do not release energy by burning fuels. We harvest energy from the forces of nature. This is an important distinction to make. These natural forces from which we can harvest energy are wildly abundant, everywhere, truly inexhaustible, and clean. And they are distributed energy sources. Everybody has some. I have enough solar energy falling on my roof at home every day to power my home and my electric vehicle. Forever. And inexpensive too. Both wind and solar are now reaching cost parity with all other sources of energy. And as early as next year will likely be the most inexpensive energy sources ever created. And these costs, as efficiency continues to improve and production continues to ramp up, will continue to fall. That's why they are the fastest growing energies on the planet, attracting more investment dollars every year and creating more jobs and wealth than gas, oil, coal, and nuclear combined. China, for instance, is presently installing some 300,000 solar panels every day. But this change to clean energy is slow, far too slow to adequately address the climate emergency that we are now facing. Powerful vested interests and political ideology continue to hold us back. This must change. There will be no shortage of jobs during this energy transition. And these new clean energy workers, I believe, will become the true heroes of the 21st century. I think it's time for us all to get to work and become the heroes that we were all meant to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Well, we've deliberately left time for questions, and I'd ask the panelists to come up here, and we've got a microphone to distribute among them. I just have had a question in my mind as you're going. By the way, that's the funkiest music I've ever heard from a guy with a gray beard. It's just as old as I am. Well done, Don. How many people in this room are under 30? That's a good, I'll tell you, this is a big mix from our previous two events. Most of the people were over 60 and plus. The reason I'm asking that is because, as you obviously know, the world that we're talking about, the way it's going, is what you're going to be dealing with. And I can say that there are a lot of people, and you've heard several of them here tonight, who want to work with you and try and make a collaborative effort to stop this collision with a very negative future. So please bear that in mind. We can all do this, but we have to work together. So, questions? Anybody would like to ask, either Dawn or Freda? Sir.
There's a mic up the front too. There's a mic just here.
Quite so exposed.
So this question is specifically for Dawn. A big portion of this talk was centered around natural gas. I think the statistic was 85% of natural gas comes from fracking. And I'm wondering, on your website at Peace Energy Co-op, one of your partners is AltaGas, a corporation which has invested significantly in natural gas. I'm just wondering if you can speak to the nature of that relationship.
Yeah, you bet. We partnered with AltaGas and another company, Aeolus Wind Power, out of the Lower Mainland here, to make Bear Mountain Wind Park a reality. So we kind of think of AltaGas as a reasonably enlightened gas company. I don't know what they've been doing much since Bear Mountain Wind. But they did put up all the money to most of the money to basically build that $200 million facility, which now powers 35,000 homes with wind energy. And I know they have gone ahead and done other investments in renewables. They've got a run-of-river in the Lower Mainland, quite fairly significant. Several other wind investments throughout the states. They've got a geothermal plant under development in the States. So, you know, I would consider Gas, though not perfect, to be one of the more enlightened gas companies that is enlarging its investment base to encompass renewable energy as well as non-renewable energy. So to me, that feels like a pretty good way to go if you're a gas company. You should be taking your profits and investing them into renewables. I would say more quickly than any of them are, but Gas is at least doing something. And they were really good to work with through the 6-7 years we worked with them on Bear Mountain Wind Park. So does that help answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
That was a yes, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't quite quick enough with the mute button.
So, don't tell me you know everything you need to know about the subject. Please, feel free to.
Just like to thank everybody tonight who's presented, because certainly for myself, I spend a lot of time procrastinating and not doing anything. And to you all, I applaud you. Okay. And the people from a distance, absolutely brilliant. And thank you for presenting tonight. I don't know whether it's a local dialect from where I'm from, but gobsmacked is what we call it.
We know the word.
In terms of how we can have 5 billion invested in the likes of LNG, and here in Squamish, you know, we've got the carbon recapture plant, and have that sort of money invested. And I don't know if anybody's there to do the math in terms of, you know, how much. One's just such clean energy that we should be looking towards the future, and it should be just common sense to me that we'd be working to the sunrise industries, which I quite like that term, thank you, and instead of the sunset industries.
Sure. Thank you. Tracey, would you like to speak to that?
Sorry, just grabbing the mic. Yeah, so what's been fascinating to me is to see carbon engineering and how they've just quietly come in, set up, created so many jobs in the community, and they've done it without any of the hoo-ha-ha or, hey, we're fantastic, or, hey, we need LNG because jobs, and, you know, but, hey, we're going to come and we need money, like, which is what the LNG industry is essentially doing. And it boggles my mind as well. Flabbergasted is a good term. I'm sure I've got some other Aussieisms in there that I could throw in, but nobody else would understand. So yeah, it really is a boondoggle of the highest degree. There you go, that's another good word. Especially because right now, like this month, actually it's last month now, gosh, it's April already. In March, the prices for LNG in Asia hit the lowest they have been in 19 months. So we're at rock bottom right now. It's about $4. For LNG to be viable, they estimate, I think it's anywhere between 8, 10, or 12. I can't remember the exact number, but there's a certain number that they have to hit so that they can make a profit.
It's about 9 or 11.
It's 9 or 11? Yeah, it's somewhere in that range. And so what's happening now, what we're seeing right now is this government is so set on developing an LNG export industry that they're giving the farm away. There are no benefits to digging up our natural resources as quickly as we can and exporting them as quickly as we can overseas. The only beneficiaries are the companies that are set to make a huge profit. So they're getting subsidies for their electricity. Your power bills are going to go up because Site C Dam is being built so that we can call our LNG the cleanest LNG in the world. And you're going to pay for that. because LNG is not paying the cost of that energy or the cost for that electricity. Your gas bills, your natural gas bills, if you have natural gas to heat your home, and a lot of communities in northern BC rely on natural gas as their primary heating source, your gas bills are also going to go up. And we've seen this in Australia. So as soon as you export your natural gas resources and there's a limited supply, your domestic natural gas prices are going to go up. And we've seen that in the industry magazines. They're talking about this as if this is a fantastic thing. For industry, it is. For us, it's not. So yeah, it is really quite amazing to me that government is pursuing business as usual, and they've got the blinkers on, and I don't understand. I legitimately do not understand their reasoning or their rationale.
Please. Sorry, the mic's so far away. Geographically challenged.
Thanks for all of you coming out today. It's awesome to hear your perspectives. I grew up actually in a small farm in Flat Rock, BC, just between Dawson and Fort St. John. I live in Squamish now, but my family's still all up there. They are running the family farm still. Luckily, I don't think we've had quite the influx there of fracking so far. But in speaking with a lot of my connections there, it still kind of seems like there's a lack of awareness of the sacrifices that they're making, or at least a willingness to kind of ignore or look past that in order to get the quick dollars that the oil and gas industry still provide. So I guess my question for you is, have you noticed any change in the awareness or the receptiveness of the local population there to the risks that are becoming more clear and being raised now?
Sure. Karl?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of public unawareness. I think the public outreach is really, really poor. I've tried to organize many public meetings through oil and gas companies, and it ends up being, like kind of a perimeter of presentations or like stands and stuff, and you can go get good information, but it's not a public meeting like this. And in my community anyway, that's what I've noticed, and it's kind of, there's not enough information, especially about fracking. Like, I'm concerned about the integrity of the infrastructure already, and we don't talk about fracking as a community at all where I am. I don't know if that maybe is that something.
I think the communities who really got active and tried to organize themselves and try to go to court and went to court with the oil and gas companies, they get up in the so far, because the oil and gas companies will come with a team of lawyers, and they have maybe one volunteer lawyers to take their case forward, and there's no way you can win. And so when you ask around the ones who were active and saw the risk and involvement, what it happens to their land, and livelihood, they give up, because there's no way you can do anything to change it. So that's why I think it's so important to have the South here informed, which is rich in population and educated people and interested people, to raise their voice. And with health risk too, and even if I have patients that work in oil and gas and they truck this waste fluid, which has radioactivity in it, and I said, how do you protect? Do you have a dose meter to nothing, right? And the thing will curb up the window of their truck cabin, they're protected from radioactivity, right? And there is an anonymous number from Workers' Compensation Board where you can phone if you want to complain, but nobody wants to complain. And they say it pays the bill, or they clean their trucks with a formaldehyde solution that gets heated up to, I think, prevent the scaling inside from the wastewater and all the chemicals, and then it goes out on a smokestack on the truck, and he said he's downwind from it. It's really not perfect for him. And I said, you should mask up and gear up, and his answer is pays the bill, and it's as it is, and he's not complaining. Or young pregnant women working in the oil field, and some will quit the job and because they're exposed to lots of toxins, and Yeah, so it's not much education of the health risk in the long term, what will happen to them. And so it's really sad to see. But then we can inform, and we will do that. Karen, I, and Karl, right? We will go around in the north and do a northern tour, and then probably also in the interior with Cape. So that is the plan, to inform and see what the direction will be.
Okay.
Thank you. That's a great question. Could I just quickly ask, how many people in this room have heard things that they didn't really realize were going on, how bad it was? Well, we're very happy to hear that, because one of the purposes, as Ulrike referred to, was coming here so you would hear what's actually going on. You'd know that this is not just a kind of a distant problem. This is a problem affecting human beings just like you, who want to live their lives in some kind of peace and comfort and are being pushed around. One other question. How many of you have felt overwhelmed yourselves? Just like, what can we do? Oh my God. I do psychotherapy. We'll meet afterwards, okay? I think this is designed to try and reduce that. So, other questions? Sir.
Thank you very much for doing this wonderful one online. My name's Anton. I live on Bowen Island. I've been working with Tracey, getting the message out to people in our community and Vancouver. My question is we hear from Shell, we hear from other large companies, but what I'm very curious about is, who are the actual companies who are doing the fracking? Because if we have some names, some information, we can do something.
Well, the one in our local area is Encana Corporation, that I don't know if you guys, it's Shell. There's a lot of junior companies as well that you talk about, the abandoned wells, who have since gone out of business and left their mess behind. ARC is another one. Murphy Oil. There's a bunch of small players that feed into larger players. So yeah, I'd say in our area directly, it's probably Encana. It's a big one.
So are there lists or databases?
Pardon? The Oil and Gas Commission website would probably have it, yeah. The permits. Again, I think back to the last question, there's just such a lack of information up there. You go to these meetings, Ulrike and I have, there's probably about 40 people from Encana that are standing around, and people where we live closest to, about 8 kilometers from Dawson Creek, is Puskupi. When I my previous life, when I was doing environmental management and community relations, we would travel to all the communities. It was part of our job that we were regulated under the Environmental Assessment Act, that people needed to be notified. They had to be informed. It was our responsibility to do the baseline work and come and present it sort of like this with a panel of experts. You go there, they serve you a meal, they take you on a bus ride, and it's really, it's terrible. You walk out of there and you just feel so powerless. For example, where we live, I wrote a 10-page technical report to Encana, and Ulrike wrote one on health. And in our area, the elk, there's regionally significant winter elk habitat. And we received a report actually from the government, the MOE, and we sent it to Encana as a part of the technical report. And when we went to the technical meeting, the person that was in charge of wildlife showed me a map, and I said, well, where are the elk? And she said, oh, is there elk up there? And it's just, their information is based on a patchwork of government information, which is essentially, as a scientist, useless. And so now, since they've got their permit, they've burned it, they're fracking less than a kilometer from my house. It wasn't monitored before to see what happened during. There's no mitigation for after. So really, we don't know what happened. Encana has one wildlife biologist, which isn't even technically a biologist, a technician that's moving into that position. They sent him up one day in June, it's winter habitat, and he came back and said, I didn't see any elk. If you can believe that's true.
June is not in the winter, just for anybody who's wondering.
One to Freda. You're on the front lines. You're representing all of us in terms of what you're doing, and we want to be able to support you in whatever way we can. We're far away, and sometimes we're not too sure what to do. Could you give us an idea of what you would like us to do to support your cause?
Well, like some of the other respondents said, there was not enough education. I think I put in a request that if this same event that you hosted down south held up the north here, because so many people are being told that it's natural gas, it's clean, and it's being sold as jobs. So it would be good to educate people in the north. Like from what I'm hearing from the other presenters, it would be good for people here to hear that same message, so that people can see that it's not a great idea, that whatever they're trying to sell to our people up here. And for being up here, we have a Facebook page and a web page that shows how you can support, because we have a lot of people that come up physically to support, and it takes a lot of funds to feed these people. And right now we're in a legal battle right now, and that is costing us quite a bit. Lawyers aren't cheap, and we're really optimistic that we could defeat them in the court systems, even though they claim that nobody's ever won in an injunction. I'm always optimistic, saying there's always a first time for everything, so that could be a first time that we could defeat that injunction, because they had so many errors in their documents. So you can see our page, and it tells us you can support financially, or even support just by educating other people with the truth of what's going on, because the mainstream media doesn't tell the truth of what's really happening up here. We have to put out our own truth on our Facebook page through our own videos and our own documents, showing that the media is not telling all the truth. They're only telling one side of the story, and that's why we pretty much have our own media here. So we do have a Facebook page, and we also have a website that we keep updated to let people. We haven't had too much updates because of we can't share too much regarding what our legal strategy is, because of course they're watching our website. So they're watching our Facebook page and the website. They monitor everything we do.
Thank you very much, Freda. Perhaps it's appropriate at this point to say that the money that has been donated at the first two sessions that we've held so far in Courtenay and in Victoria, as well as tonight and tomorrow in Vancouver and the day after that in Coquitlam, all the donations that we receive at the door will be going to support your work in Wet'suwet'en territory. And I want the audience to know that too. Yeah, I just asked Larry how much we've raised so far in the two sessions. It's $1,200. So we're happy to have that go to the work you're doing, Freda.
There is a donation jar at the door.
There is a donation jar at the door. If your pocket is burning, you know what to do. Any further questions from the audience? Please, yeah. Yes, in the hoodie, and then the gentleman in the baseball cap. So if you come up, and then there you are.
If fracking's been pretty predominant over like the last 30 years, I'm just wondering why there hasn't been data collected on emissions in terms of health and safety impact and environmental impact, and then essentially feeding that up to federal regulations to determine whether permits should actually be given to these fracking operations.
Brilliant question. Some of you.
They did
That's a good
the
question.
health impact study from 2012 to 2014, right, which I cited there in the BC Ministry of Health. and the OGC and Northern Health was involved too. And they did soil sample, air samples, and food samples, and water samples, and came to the conclusion that in some location, in some instances, there is elevated levels, but overall there's no risk to the rest of the population. And that was the conclusion. But that was finished in 2014 and is cited then by the industry too, that it's safe and gives the green light for the government too. And that was before there was a surge in research in the States, and they were given money to do studies in the States to the universities, right? And so that's where all the data came after 2013. And but this is what the Ministry of Health did in BC, and that's their baseline, which is not updated, definitely not.
So my understanding is that there was a report that the BC government commissioned. There was an independent scientific review panel looking at the impacts of fracking, and that was leaked a couple of weeks ago, and it's now been formally released. And the scientists concluded that there is a lack of transparency and no baseline data. So industry has been self-regulating, and that is a big problem, because they are aware of a lot of these issues, but they're either not sharing that information, or they are suppressing it, or they are not collecting it. And this is why that self-regulation is a really big problem. And it's one of the issues that, as part of My Sea to Sky, we've also been focusing on through the environmental assessment reports. They don't work. The process is broken. The government has acknowledged at both the federal and the provincial level that environmental assessment process is broken. And that's because, again, we're relying on a process called professional reliance. And that is where the company hires the scientists or the environmental consultants that then come forward with their reports. And what is happening often is that if the company doesn't like the reports, they don't publish it, and they won't hire those environmental consultants or the scientists again. So that predisposes the scientists who, want to eat to actually change the information, or it gets modified. And I have been involved in a couple of different environmental assessment processes right now. One for a project in northern BC on LNG, and I've witnessed personally where one of my fellow consultants said this project is going to have severe impacts on this particular community, and somebody in the company higher up actually changed his conclusions because they don't want to say that. The company's not going to like it if they say that. And this is happening all across BC, all throughout the environmental assessment process, and it's one of the reasons that we're trying to fix the process so that can't happen anymore. And with regards to fracking, a lot of the studies are just coming out now. There's been some recent studies on health impacts. There's a lot of other studies that are happening on the methane that is being released. A lot of science takes time. And because there's just been this huge ramp up in the amount of fracking that's happening, it's only just now sort of like being published in the journal articles and stuff. And again, a lot of that data is not being made available by the companies that are actually doing it. So that lack of transparency is a real issue.
Yeah, on the farm, I've asked for baseline studies just out of curiosity where I find them, and it's next to impossible, and they just aren't done on like groundwater. A lot of people have dugouts. Water wells, we don't have a lot of water wells, which I think is a big problem. So they're avoiding baseline studies or telling farmers about them because we don't have to irrigate up there. Just a real lack of transparency, or maybe it just isn't being done. I'm not sure.
Just about the environmental assessment process, I've worked for a lot of proponents and I've never seen data changed. In my opinion, it's actually the regulations and pushing the government. We're not putting the proponents' feet to the fire. There's actually no requirement for the baseline studies on the oil and gas, and that's a problem. It's like asking someone, oh, it's a nice to do, you're gonna look good, can you collect 3 to 5 years? My budget when I worked for some mining companies just for environment was $5 million. under the Environmental Assessment Act, you're also required to have an independent third party do your monitoring. That makes a huge difference. The water reports we're getting right now are developed by people that work for Encana. And so when we moved to the Northeast, I was just like dumbfounded that they're able to show up, get a permit, do nothing before, nothing during, and nothing after. Whereas if you can take a project from cradle to cradle, it's very powerful. I do some work on behalf of another First Nation, and I sat at a round table. I was there with 2 senior mining companies and the First Nation, and we were designing the mine for closure. So there is hope in terms of we do need an economy as well. I think that's something important to remember, but it can be done well. I've seen it done. So.
We're approaching 9 o'clock, and there's, gentleman in the ball cap, you had a question. I just wanted, this will probably be the last question tonight.
Thank you. So I'm quite new here, so I'm very unfamiliar with the politics of the Northeast BC geography. So forgive me if this is sort of nonsensical, but I would like to know if you know where fracking is happening, where, like, how Indigenous sovereignty has been upheld or not upheld, and what, and if consent has been given or not. Just kind of like a little bit of a background information on that would be awesome. Thank you.
Just to be clear, are you asking about the Aboriginal consultation up there, or the in regards to the projects? Okay, so that was another thing that I was astonished by up there, because in our region it's Treaty 8. So there's a number of different communities up there. That was actually with my background, one of my questions when we went to some of these consultation meetings. There was only farmers and a couple other public people there. And I said, well, have you talked to the First Nations? And they said, oh, that's all separate. So there's no partnership happening. It's a sign off. They've basically divided and conquered. And I see that with not only the First Nations, but the landowners. And again, there's just no information. So it's a really, really poor system.
For the geography or for the formation where you find shale gas, it's going up from way up Fort Nelson area. And there's a Horn Basin. And the Horn Basin is a different formation than the Montney shale gas, which goes up through the Alberta border where we live. So the whole area is gas, right? Fracking. The Horn Basin is different. They need way, way more water up there. It's like 80,000 cubic meters for fracking a well. In our area, in the Montney Formation, you need around 14,000 to 16,000 cubic meter per fracking. So they jeopardized in the Fort Nelson region their groundwater, and the First Nation fought them because if they had a drought, they had no drinking water. And I think they were successful with it. They were quite active. So that's the two different formations up in northern BC.
Freda, did you want to speak to that question? Did you want to reiterate the question?
Did you hear you? Yeah, okay.
What was the question about consulting?
Yeah, it was about consultations with First Nations.
Okay. There was no real consulting, and what they did is similar to what there was a lot of divide and conquer that happened, and they decided to consult with the First Nations bands, which the projects don't even go through any of the reservations, and we have a hereditary system, and they did not recognize our hereditary system and refused to speak to our hereditary chiefs. And even though these hereditary chiefs were the very chiefs that went through the Delgamuukw and Kasteway court case, the company decided they weren't going to consult with the hereditary chiefs and decided to buy out the Indigenous bands by giving them money to become partners in the project. And to me, when you invest in partnerships, I would put 50 grand in and you would put 50 grand in, we'd be partners. So it blows me away that the province put 60% of the funds, and the industry itself only put 40% of the funds And then they gave funds to the First Nations bands to sign on partnership agreements. And we have never relinquished our territories to any band councils or any tribal councils. And that was proven through Delgamuth that the province needed to meet and speak with the hereditary chiefs, and that did not happen. They basically just skirted around the hereditary chiefs and spoke to band councils, which none of the projects go through any of the band council. Band reserves are like municipalities, so it would almost be like if it's a municipality and whatever's within that boundary, it's under federal jurisdiction, that federal funding goes through the bands. So I don't understand how, if they're federal, why did they become part of a provincial project? That's in a provincial, what is deemed provincial territory, but it's actually our territories.
Thank you very much, Freda. We're going to come to an end now. I'd like to first of all thank our panelists who've come roaming across the countryside to be with us. I'd like to particularly thank Tracey as well for organizing much of the kind of focusing some of the hookups and the attachments and the linkages that have made this evening go properly. For those of you who are wondering what next steps you might take, we've prepared a single sort of card sheet. It's on the back, at the table at the back, and on one side it says, what are the issues? On the other side it says, what can I do? I'll tell you something, I do a lot of psychotherapy in my practice. I'm a family physician, but psychotherapy is where you talk to people and ask them searching questions as opposed to handing them a pill. And if you wanted to characterize the oil and gas industry, it's like a person who's been in charge of a lot of things and had a great deal of authority and been recognized in the social structure as the boss, but now starting to make decisions that don't make any sense anymore and maybe losing a few marbles and becoming a little off base. And the rest of us are seeing that with increasing clarity. But he, and I'll use he because that may apply to more people in the oil and gas industry than otherwise, but the industry is starting to realize people are getting a little cranky and not accepting what it's saying. So it's becoming defensive. And the only answer is not for one person to take that cranky old individual on, but for all of us to work as a group and form a wall around that person, informing ourselves of what the problem is and making sure that the actions of this increasingly demented, may I use the term, but certainly out of control individual are contained, limited, and shelved off in a different direction and replaced with better ways. That's essentially, in human terms, what we're dealing with right now. Anyway, enough psychotherapy. Thank you all as an audience for coming. And before you go, we have 3 individuals here who we've got a small token of appreciation for: Christian, Katie, and Ian, who are local denizens. Would you come up, please? So, don't forget this little thing, and don't forget that all the proceeds that you donate tonight will go to the Wet'suwet'en cause, and they're going to court, as you heard, in May, and they have a lot of expenses. And they're doing, as Larry said, they're working on our behalf as well as their own. So I thank you all very much for coming out tonight on a beautiful evening. You could have been out strolling in the evening dusk, but you came here tonight to hear what's being said. You can all be part of the change, and many of you already are, and I hope you continue in that, because if we all work together, we can bring this movement of change forward much faster than it seems to be going right now, and that's the secret. Talk to your friends. I would mention also for the students here, if you haven't heard Greta Thunberg, the now 16 to 17-year-old Swedish teenager, speak to the last climate conference. Anybody here not know her name? Greta Thunberg? Okay, look her up. Get one of your professors, teachers, whatever do you call them here, to get that up and bring it up for discussion in your classes, because she is an extraordinary, eloquent young woman who's spoken to truth to power, as they say, and had a significant impact. So Fridays for Future, if you've heard of that, that's part of what she's done. Anyway, a final word. Thank you very much for coming.
And a big thank you to CAPE and to Quest for helping to organize this event.
Absolutely.
And to all of our volunteers, our amazing volunteers that always just make everything happen flawlessly. You are much appreciated.